Your breath moves through you right now. Not because you command it, but because something deeper than thought sustains this body. Feel the weight of your form against whatever surface holds you. The temperature of air touching skin. This moment, unadorned, uninterpreted, exists before you name it. What if everything you believe about yourself is a carefully constructed fiction? Not a comforting fiction, not even a conscious one, but a survival mechanism so ancient, so embedded in your neural architecture, that you mistake it for truth. You wake each morning and slip into this identity like worn clothing, never questioning whether it still fits, never asking who chose these garments in the first place. The persona you present to the world, competent, composed, acceptable, requires constant maintenance. Constant vigilance. You've been performing this role so long that the exhaustion feels normal. The tension in your jaw feels like personality. The knot between your shoulder blades feels like adulthood. But something is shifting. You wouldn't be here otherwise. There's a recognition beginning to surface, subtle as morning light through closed curtains. A sense that beneath the carefully managed surface, something vast and unexamined waits. Not patiently, not quietly, but with the insistence of water against a dam. If you feel this recognition stirring, if something in these words touches the unspoken knowing you've carried, then subscribe to this channel. Not as passive consumption, but as commitment to your own awakening. This work requires witnesses. It requires community. It requires you to mark this moment as significant. We stand now at a threshold. What follows is not comfortable. It is not designed to soothe or reassure. It is designed to crack open the shell you've been living inside, to introduce you to the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime avoiding, and to guide you toward an integration so complete that the person you are now will seem like a distant memory. The question is not whether you're ready. The question is whether you're willing to stop pretending. Before language, before the concept of I, there was only sensation. Warmth meant safety. Cold meant danger. The infant body registered approval as a flood of oxytocin, disapproval as cortisol spike and nervous system alarm. You learn the architecture of love before you learn to walk. This is where identity begins, not in conscious choice, but in the body's desperate calculus of survival. A child expresses rage at injustice. The room goes silent. Faces harden. The warmth withdraws. The nervous system registers this withdrawal as existential threat, because for a dependent being, it is. The rage doesn't disappear. It becomes dangerous. It becomes something that threatens survival itself. Another day, the same child complies. Smiles when expected. Suppresses need. The warmth returns. Approval floods the system. The body learns, this version of me is safe. This version gets to live. You didn't choose this adaptation. You were 3 or 4 or 5 years old. You were doing what every organism does, learning which behaviors ensure survival in your particular environment. The child who grows up in chaos learns hypervigilance. The child who grows up with conditional love learns performance. The child who grows up with neglect learns invisibility. Each adaptation was intelligent. Each was necessary. Each saved you. But here's what nobody tells you. The strategies that ensured your survival as a child become the prison bars of your adult existence. Carl Jung called this constructed identity the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social reality. Not a pathology, not a weakness, a necessary interface between the raw, unfiltered truth of our being and the demands of civilization. The persona allows you to function at dinner parties, to hold employment, to move through the world without constant conflict. The persona is the version of you that learned to be likable, competent, appropriate, controlled. But what happened to everything else? The wildness that didn't fit the family system, the anger that threatened the peace, the desire that seemed too demanding, the grief that made others uncomfortable, the ambition that might have outshone a parent, the sexuality that violated unspoken rules, the authentic no that would have caused rupture. These parts didn't vanish. They couldn't. Energy doesn't disappear, it transforms. What was too raw, too threatening, too alive to be acceptable, it sank. Down into the basement of your psyche. Down into what Jung named the shadow. And there it remains. Growing. Fermenting. Pressing against the floorboards of your conscious life. You are perhaps 30 or 40 or 50 years old now. The persona that saved you in childhood has calcified into your entire sense of self. You introduce yourself at parties with your job title, your relationship status, your achievements. You believe this is who you are. But late at night, when the performance finally stops, there's a feeling you can't quite name. a hollowness, a sense of living at a distance from your own life, watching yourself through glass. You achieve the goals you set, but the satisfaction evaporates within hours. You maintain the relationships, but intimacy feels like a concept you understand intellectually without ever quite touching. The exhaustion is constant now. Not the clean tiredness of physical exertion, but the grinding fatigue of perpetual self-monitoring. Every interaction requires calculation. What version of me does this situation demand? What parts must I hide? What performance will keep me safe? Your nervous system never rests. Even in sleep, the vigilance continues. You wake unrest, jaw clenched, already braced for the day's required performances. And you are beginning to feel the difference between the mask and what lives beneath it. This recognition arrives in fragments. A moment when you catch yourself mid-sentence, speaking words you don't believe to maintain an image you don't care about. A flash of rage so pure it terrifies you, quickly suppressed. A fantasy of walking away from your entire life that feels more real than the life itself. These moments are not pathology. They are not breakdown. They are breakthrough attempting to happen. The persona is beginning to crack. Not because you're failing, but because you're finally strong enough to survive without it. The child needed the mask. The adult you're becoming no longer does. But the transition, the space between who you've been and who you might become, this is where the real work lives. This is where most people turn back. Because what comes next requires something our culture has trained us to avoid at all costs. It requires you to turn toward what you've spent your entire life running from. The shadow is not your enemy. It is not the bad parts of you that need to be transcended or eliminated. It is the disowned, rejected, exiled aspects of your full humanity. It contains your rage, yes, but also your power. Your shame, yes, but also your authenticity. Your darkness, yes, but also your depth. Jung understood what most spiritual teachings miss. You cannot transcend what you have not integrated. You cannot rise above what you refuse to face. The pursuit of light without acknowledgement of darkness doesn't create enlightenment. It creates spiritual bypassing, a more sophisticated form of the same avoidance. The persona whispers, I am good. I am kind. I am evolved. I am beyond such base emotions. The shadow responds, then why do you judge others with such venom? Why does their success trigger your rage? Why do you feel such contempt for weakness you claim to have compassion for? Every quality you judge harshly in others is a quality you've rejected in yourself. Every person who triggers disproportionate emotional response is showing you your own face in a mirror you refuse to look into. The colleague whose confidence you label as arrogance, you've suppressed your own healthy assertion. The friend whose neediness irritates you, you've starved your own legitimate dependency. The stranger whose body you judge, you've rejected your own flesh. The public figure whose anger you despise, you've buried your own necessary boundaries. This is the mechanism of projection, and it operates with perfect precision. What you cannot own in yourself, you will see everywhere outside yourself. And you will hate it with the intensity of self-hatred turned outward. But here's the paradox that changes everything. The shadow contains not just what is bad, but what is powerful, what is alive, what is real. The rage you rejected as a child, it holds your capacity for healthy boundaries, for saying no, for protecting what matters. The greed you learned to shame, it contains your will to live, your hunger for experience, your refusal to settle for crumbs. The sexuality you repressed, it holds your creative life force, your capacity for pleasure, your connection to the body's wisdom. The sadness you've been too strong to feel, it contains your capacity for genuine intimacy, for letting others matter, for being touched by beauty. You rejected these parts because they threatened your survival in the environment you were born into. But you are no longer in that environment. You are no longer that child. And the parts you exiled are not your enemies. They are the lost fragments of your wholeness, waiting to come home. The question is whether you're brave enough to open the door. The body knows before the mind admits. That tension between your shoulder blades isn't just poor posture. It's the physical manifestation of holding yourself together. The knot in your stomach isn't just stress. It's the constant vigilance required to maintain a false self. The low hum of anxiety you've learned to call normal isn't a chemical imbalance. It's your organism's intelligent response to living in contradiction with your own nature. You wake tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the exhausting labor of being someone you're not. Every morning, you reconstruct the persona. You put on the face that your job requires, your family expects, your social circle recognizes. You speak in the cadence that signals belonging. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You express opinions you don't hold. You perform interest in conversations that bore you. You suppress reactions that feel too raw, too real, too revealing. This is not conscious deception. This is survival strategy so deeply embedded that you experience it as personality. But the cost is mounting. The symptoms are no longer subtle. Perhaps it's anxiety that arrives without clear cause. You're successful by external measures, stable job, functional relationships, respectable life. Yet panic grips you in meetings, in crowds, in the middle of the night. Your mind races through catastrophic scenarios, searching for the threat your nervous system insists is present. The threat is not external. The threat is the growing gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be. Or perhaps it's depression that settles like fog. Not the acute grief of loss, but a chronic flatness. Colors seem muted. Food loses taste. Achievements feel hollow. You go through the motions of living while feeling fundamentally disconnected from life itself. Therapists call it anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. But it's not inability. It's the natural consequence of abandoning your authentic self. You cannot feel genuine joy while living a counterfeit existence. Or perhaps it's the rage that leaks through despite your best efforts. You snap at your partner over minor infractions. You feel disproportionate anger at strangers' small transgressions. You fantasize about screaming at your boss, at your parents, at the world. Then you feel ashamed of these feelings, which only drives them deeper into shadow, where they ferment into bitterness and resentment. These are not pathologies. These are not character flaws. These are not signs that something is wrong with you. These are messengers, intelligent signals from the parts of you that refuse to be silenced forever. The anxiety is your authentic self trying to break through the prison of the persona. The depression is your psyche's refusal to invest energy in a false life. The rage is your power demanding to be acknowledged. The shame is the internalized voice of those who needed you to be smaller than you are. But our culture has trained you to pathologize these signals, to medicate them, to therapy them away, to positive think them into submission, to spiritual bypass them with affirmations about light and love. What if instead of trying to eliminate these symptoms, you listen to what they're telling you? The panic attack in the middle of a successful career might be saying, "This path is not yours. You're living someone else's dream." The depression that descends despite having everything you thought you wanted might be saying, "These achievements mean nothing because they're not connected to your authentic desire." The rage that erupts at small provocations might be saying, "You've been violating your own boundaries for so long that even minor transgressions feel like existential threats." Your symptoms are not the problem. Your symptoms are your psyche's attempt to solve the problem of self-abandonment. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Here's where most people turn away. Because if your anxiety, your depression, your rage are intelligent signals rather than pathologies, then you can't just fix them. You have to listen to them. You have to follow them down into the places you've been avoiding. You have to meet what you've been running from. And what you've been running from is the shadow. Not as abstract concept, not as psychological theory, but as living presence within your own psyche. The shadow is not absent. It is not gone. It is not transcended through spiritual practice or positive thinking. It is here, now, pressing against the walls of your carefully constructed life with increasing insistence. Every time you judge someone with unusual intensity, the shadow is speaking. Every time you feel triggered by qualities you claim to have moved beyond, the shadow is revealing itself. Every time you experience emotions that seem disproportionate to the situation, the shadow is demanding recognition. You hate the arrogant colleague with a passion that surprises you. Why? Because you've suppressed your own healthy confidence, labeled it as ego, and now you encounter your own disowned assertion wearing someone else's face. You feel contempt for the needy friend who always wants support. Why? Because you've starved your own legitimate dependency, prided yourself on self-sufficiency, and now you meet your own rejected vulnerability in another person. You despise the public figure who expresses anger. Why? Because you've buried your own rage so deep that seeing it expressed freely feels like a threat to your entire identity structure. You judge the person who pursues pleasure without guilt. Why? Because you've rejected your own capacity for enjoyment, and their freedom mirrors your imprisonment. This is the mechanism Jung described with such precision. We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. The world becomes a screen onto which we project our own disowned qualities. And we hate them out there with the intensity of self-hatred turned outward. But projection is not just a psychological curiosity. It's a prison. Because as long as you're projecting your shadow onto others, you're giving away your power. You're making your inner state dependent on external circumstances. You're trapped in reactivity, triggered by qualities in others that are actually qualities in yourself. The person who triggers you is not your enemy. They're your teacher. They're showing you exactly what you need to integrate. And integration, true integration, not intellectual understanding, requires something our culture has taught you to avoid: descent. You have to go down into the basement of your psyche. You have to open the door you've kept locked. You have to meet what lives in the darkness. Not to transcend it, not to eliminate it, not to rise above it, but to recognize it as yours, to own it, to bring it home. This is where the real discomfort begins, because the shadow doesn't contain just socially unacceptable emotions. It contains the parts of you that feel dangerous, primitive, uncivilized, the parts that don't fit the story you've been telling about who you are. The spiritual seeker who prides themselves on compassion must meet their capacity for cruelty. The intellectual who values rationality must meet their irrational desires. The person who identifies as victim must meet their own capacity for perpetration. The one who sees themselves as perpetually strong must meet their profound vulnerability. And here's the paradox that most people cannot accept. The very qualities you've rejected often contain your deepest power. The anger you've suppressed doesn't just hold rage. It holds your capacity to protect what you love, to establish boundaries, to say no to violation. The greed you've shamed doesn't just hold selfishness. It holds your will to live, your hunger for experience, your refusal to accept less than you deserve. The pride you've rejected doesn't just hold arrogance. It holds your healthy self-regard, your ability to recognize your own value, your capacity to take up space. What if the answer to your exhaustion, your anxiety, your depression, your rage, what if the answer lives in precisely what you've been running from? What if the parts of yourself you've exiled hold the keys to your liberation? This is not comfortable. This is not safe. This is not the gentle, soothing spirituality that promises peace without transformation. This is the descent that precedes every genuine awakening. This is the death that precedes every rebirth. The question is not whether you're ready. The question is whether you're willing to stop defending against your own wholeness. Because the shadow is not waiting patiently. It's not going to politely disappear because you've done enough therapy or read enough books or meditated enough hours. It's going to keep pressing, keep erupting, keep showing up in your projections, your symptoms, your dreams, your sudden inexplicable reactions, until you finally turn around and look it in the face. And when you do, when you finally stop running and turn to meet what you've been fleeing, something extraordinary happens. Something that cannot be understood intellectually, only experienced directly. The monster you've been running from reveals itself as the lost child you abandoned. The darkness you've been avoiding reveals itself as the depth you've been seeking. The enemy you've been fighting reveals itself as the ally you've needed all along. But you cannot know this from here. You can only know this by going there, by descending, by opening the door, by meeting what waits in the shadow with the courage to say, "You are mine. You belong to me. Come home." Are you willing? There is a place within you that you visit only in dreams, and even then, you wake before seeing clearly. Not a metaphorical place, an actual territory of your psyche, as real as the room you're sitting in, populated by the aspects of yourself you've refused to acknowledge. This is not imagination. This is recognition. Close your eyes if you haven't already. No, don't close them. Keep them open but soften your gaze. Let the external world blur slightly. Because what we're approaching exists in the space between waking and sleeping, between conscious and unconscious, between the self you know and the self you've forgotten. Feel into your body. Not the body as object, but the body as lived experience. Notice where you hold tension, where you've armored yourself. The jaw that never quite releases. The shoulders that carry invisible weight. The belly that stays perpetually clenched. These are not just physical patterns. They are the somatic signature of what you're defending against. Now ask yourself, what would happen if I stopped defending? Just for a moment. Just here, in this private space where no one is watching. What would emerge if I lowered the shield? Don't answer with your thinking mind. Let the body answer. Let the sensation answer. Let the image or feeling or memory that arises answer. For some, it's rage that surfaces first. Not the manageable irritation you allow yourself to feel, but the ancient, volcanic fury you've kept locked away. The rage at parents who couldn't see you, at systems that diminished you, at a world that demanded you be smaller, quieter, more acceptable than you are. at yourself for complying. This rage wears a face. It has a voice. It is not abstract. It is alive within you, and it has been waiting a very long time to be acknowledged. Don't turn away. Don't spiritualize it into releasing anger or letting go. Stay with it. Let it be as large as it actually is. Let it show you what it's been protecting. Because beneath rage is always something vulnerable. Something that mattered so much that its violation created this fire. For others, it's shame that rises. The deep, wordless conviction that something is fundamentally wrong with you. Not guilt about specific actions, but shame about your very existence. The sense that if people really knew you, not the curated version, but the actual you, they would recoil. This shame has a texture, a color, a weight in your chest or your gut. It speaks in the voice of someone from your past, or perhaps in your own voice, repeating judgments you've internalized so completely you mistake them for truth. Stay with it. Don't try to counter it with affirmations. Don't try to think your way out of it. Let it be fully present. Because shame loses its power not through denial, but through exposure, through being witnessed, even if only by your own awareness, without judgment. For still others, it's desire that emerges. The raw, unfiltered wanting you've learned to dress up in acceptable language. Not the polite preferences you're allowed to have, but the primal hunger. For pleasure, for power, for recognition, for touch, for more than you've permitted yourself to want. This desire doesn't care about your spiritual ideals. It doesn't care about being evolved or enlightened. It wants what it wants with the directness of a child, the intensity of an animal, the clarity of a force of nature. And you've been starving it. Calling it greed when it's actually appetite. Calling it selfishness when it's actually self-regard. Calling it ego when it's actually life force. What if this desire is not the problem? What if suppressing it is? Or perhaps it's grief that surfaces. The accumulated sorrow of a lifetime of self-abandonment. Grief for the child you were before you learned to perform. Grief for the paths not taken because they weren't safe enough, acceptable enough, realistic enough. Grief for the relationships you've kept at arm's length because intimacy required vulnerability you couldn't risk. Grief for the years spent living at a distance from your own life. This grief is an ocean. You've been holding it back with a dam of busyness, achievement, distraction, control. But dams don't eliminate water, they just create pressure. And the pressure has been building. What if you let the dam break? Just here. Just now. What if you let yourself feel the full weight of what you've lost by refusing to be who you are? These are not separate emotions. They are facets of the shadow, the disowned, rejected, exiled aspects of your full humanity. And they are not your enemies. They are not pathologies to be cured. They are not weaknesses to be transcended. They are the lost children of your psyche, banished because their presence threatened your survival in the environment you were born into. And they have been waiting in the darkness, not patiently, but with the insistence of life itself, to be brought home. But here's what Jung understood that most people miss. The shadow is not just personal. It's not just your individual history of rejection and repression. It contains archetypal energies, ancient, collective, transpersonal forces that humanity has been grappling with since consciousness emerged. The rage you feel is not just your rage. It's the rage of every human who has been violated, diminished, silenced. The shame you carry is not just your shame. It's the shame of embodiment itself, the existential vulnerability of being a finite creature in an infinite universe. The desire you suppress is not just your desire. It's the life force that animates all existence, the eros that drives evolution itself. When you meet your shadow, you're not just meeting your personal history. You're meeting the human condition. You're encountering the same forces that ancient myths personified as gods and demons, angels and monsters. You're touching the raw material of consciousness itself. And here's the revelation that changes everything. Every person you hate, every quality you judge with venom, every weakness you despise in others, you are looking at your own shadow in a mirror. The colleague whose confidence you label as arrogance? You've rejected your own healthy assertion, your own capacity to take up space, your own right to be seen. And now you encounter this disowned quality wearing someone else's face, and you hate it with the intensity of self-hatred turned outward. The friend whose neediness irritates you? You've starved your own legitimate dependency, prided yourself on self-sufficiency, convinced yourself that needing others is weakness. And now you meet your own rejected vulnerability in another person, and you feel contempt for what you cannot allow in yourself. The public figure whose anger you despise? You've buried your own rage so deep, convinced yourself that spiritual people don't feel such base emotions, that seeing it expressed freely threatens your entire identity structure. So you judge it, you condemn it, you distance yourself from it, all while it ferments in your own basement, poisoning you from within. The person who pursues pleasure without guilt, you've rejected your own capacity for enjoyment, your own right to feel good, your own permission to want what you want. And their freedom mirrors your imprisonment, so you call them selfish, shallow, unenlightened. Anything to avoid recognizing that they have something you've denied yourself. This is the mechanism of projection, operating with perfect precision. What you cannot own in yourself, you will see everywhere outside yourself. And you will hate it, fear it, judge it, try to eliminate it from the world, all while it grows stronger within you, fed by the very energy you use to deny it. But projection is not just a psychological defense. It's a form of self-torture. Because as long as you're projecting your shadow onto others, you're trapped in reactivity. You're giving away your power. You're making your inner state dependent on external circumstances. You're living in a world populated by enemies who are actually mirrors. The way out is not to stop judging others. The way out is to recognize that every judgment is a confession. Every trigger is a teacher. Every person who evokes strong emotion in you is showing you exactly what you need to integrate. And integration, true integration, requires something radical. It requires you to stop fighting these parts. Stop trying to transcend them. Stop attempting to rise above them through spiritual practice or psychological technique. It requires you to turn toward them, to meet them, to say, "You are mine. You belong to me. I have rejected you, exiled you, pretended you didn't exist. But you are part of me, and I am ready to bring you home." This is not metaphor. This is actual practice. Right now, in this moment, you can do this. Think of a quality you judge harshly in others. The one that triggers you most consistently. The one that makes you feel morally superior when you condemn it. Got it? Now feel into your body. Where do you feel the judgment? Where do you feel the righteousness, the contempt, the distance you create from this quality? Now ask yourself, where in my own life have I expressed this quality? Where have I been what I'm judging? Not in the exact same way, perhaps, but the essence, the core. Where have I been arrogant when I judge arrogance? Where have I been needy when I judge neediness? Where have I been selfish when I judge selfishness? Don't let your mind skip past this. Don't let yourself off the hook with, "Well, I'm not as bad as they are." That's the ego defending itself. Stay with the question. Find the place where you have been what you're judging. And when you find it, when you recognize your own face in the mirror, something shifts. The judgment loses its charge. The person who triggered you becomes less monstrous. The quality you despised reveals itself as human, as yours, as part of the full spectrum of what it means to be alive. But integration goes deeper than recognizing your projections. It requires you to reclaim the power hidden in the shadow. Because here's the paradox. The rage you rejected holds your necessary boundaries. The greed you shamed contains your will to live. The pride you suppressed holds your healthy self-regard. The desire you repressed contains your creative life force. The aggression you denied holds your capacity to protect what you love. Every quality you've rejected contains not just darkness, but power. Not just pathology, but potential. Not just what is destructive, but what is necessary. The person who has rejected their anger cannot set boundaries. They become a doormat, resentful and exhausted, wondering why people take advantage of them. The person who has rejected their desire cannot pursue what they want. They become passive, waiting for life to happen to them, wondering why nothing satisfies. The person who has rejected their pride cannot recognize their own value. They become self-effacing, diminished, wondering why they feel invisible. You cannot access the power in these qualities by continuing to reject them. You cannot integrate them by transcending them. You can only reclaim them by owning them. By saying, "Yes, I contain rage. Yes, I contain greed. Yes, I contain desire. Yes, I contain all of it. And I am learning to wield these forces consciously rather than being unconsciously wielded by them." This is the invitation. Not to become your shadow. Not to act out every impulse. Not to abandon ethics or wisdom or discernment. But to stop pretending you're only light. To stop performing spiritual transcendence while your shadow leaks out in passive aggression, projection, and self-sabotage. To become whole. Not perfect. Not pure. Not enlightened in the way you imagined. But whole. Integrated. Fully human. Containing multitudes. Holding paradox. Embracing the full spectrum of what you are. What if instead of fighting these parts, instead of transcending them, instead of rising above them, you finally let them come home? What if the monster you've been running from is actually the medicine you've been seeking? What if your shadow is not your enemy, but your ally? Not your weakness, but your strength? Not what you need to eliminate, but what you need to integrate. The door is open. The invitation is extended. The only question is whether you're willing to walk through. What if, in this moment, you simply stopped? Stopped defending. Stopped managing. Stopped maintaining the elaborate story of who you are supposed to be. Stopped performing the identity you've constructed. Stopped fighting against what is. Stopped resisting what arises. Just stopped. Feel what happens in the body when you even consider this. There's probably fear. A sense of freefall. Because the persona has convinced you that without constant vigilance, without perpetual self-management, everything will collapse. You will be revealed as inadequate. You will be rejected. You will cease to exist. But what if that's not true? What if the exhaustion of maintaining the false self is far more costly than the vulnerability of being real? Try it, just for this moment. Let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. Let your belly soften. Let the mask slip just slightly. Let yourself be exactly as you are right now. Tired or alert, confused or clear, resistant or open. No performance. No improvement. No spiritual posturing. Just this. Just here. Just now. Something begins to shift. The boundaries of the self, so solid, so defended, so carefully maintained, begin to soften. Not as pathology. Not as dissolution into chaos. But as relief. Like ice finally remembering its water. Like a fist finally unclenching after holding tight for decades. The separate self, the defended identity, the I that you've been protecting so vigilantly, it begins to reveal itself as a construction. Not false exactly, but not as solid as you believed. Not as permanent. Not as necessary. There are thoughts arising. Can you notice them? Not the content of the thoughts, but the fact of them. Thoughts appearing in awareness like clouds appearing in sky. You are not the thoughts. You are the space in which thoughts arise. There are emotions moving through. Can you feel them? Not as problems to solve, but as weather patterns moving through the landscape of consciousness. Sadness like rain. Anger like thunder. Joy like sunlight. You are not the emotions. You are the awareness that witnesses them. There are sensations in the body. Can you sense them? The pressure of breath. The beating of heart. The temperature of skin. The weight of form. You are not the body. You are the consciousness that experiences embodiment. This is not dissociation. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not escaping the human experience. This is recognizing what you actually are beneath the layers of identity, beneath the constructed self, beneath the persona and the shadow and the entire psychological structure. You are the witness, the observer, the awareness itself. Not a thing, not an object, not a self in the conventional sense, but the space in which all experience occurs. The consciousness that is present before thought, during thought after thought. The awareness that was here when you were a child, that is here now, that will be here until the body ceases. This awareness has no qualities, no characteristics, no personality. It is not good or bad, evolved or primitive, spiritual or mundane. It simply is. Pure presence, pure being, pure consciousness without content. And you, the real you, not the constructed identity, you are that. For just an instant, let yourself recognize this. Not as concept, not as belief, but as direct experience. The vastness recognizes itself. The infinite becomes aware of its own infinity. You are both infinitely small, a single point of awareness in an incomprehensible universe, and infinitely large, the consciousness within which the entire universe appears. You are nothing, and you are everything. You are the drop, and you are the ocean. You are the wave, and you are the water. This is the moment mystics have tried to describe for millennia. The moment Zen calls Satori. The moment Eckhart Tolle calls presence. The moment Alan Watts called the recognition that you are the universe experiencing itself. Not metaphorically, literally, but don't try to hold on to it. Don't try to make it permanent. Don't try to achieve it or maintain it or return to it. Because even the trying is the ego reasserting itself, attempting to possess the experience, to make it into another achievement, another identity, another story about who you are. Let it come. Let it go. Like breath. Like waves. Like everything that arises in consciousness. The body breathes. You don't make it breathe. It breathes itself. The heart beats. You don't make it beat. It beats itself. Thoughts arise. You don't create them. They arise themselves. Emotions move through. You don't generate them. They move themselves. All of it, the entire human experience, is happening. And you are the awareness within which it happens. Not controlling it. Not managing it. Not improving it. Just witnessing it. Just being it. Just allowing it. This es ego def. Not as dramatic event. Not as psychedelic experience. Not as spiritual attainment. But as simple recognition. The separate self, the defended identity, the I that you thought you were, it's not that it dies. It's that you recognize it was never as solid as you believed. It's a useful fiction, a necessary interface, a way of navigating the relative world. But it's not what you are. It's what you do. It's a role you play. It's a character you inhabit. But beneath the character, prior to the character, there is the awareness that plays all characters. And that awareness, that consciousness, that is what you actually are. Feel into this, not with the thinking mind, but with direct recognition. There is a sense of spaciousness, of openness, of not being confined to the small, defended self, of being larger than your history, your personality, your psychological structure, of being the sky, not the clouds, the ocean, not the waves, the silence, not the sound. And from this recognition, something extraordinary becomes possible. Because when you're no longer defending the separate self, when you're no longer maintaining the persona, when you're no longer fighting the shadow, what's left? Compassion, not as moral virtue, not as spiritual ideal, but as natural response. Because when you recognize that the awareness looking through your eyes is the same awareness looking through every pair of eyes, how can you hate? When you see that the consciousness experiencing your life is the same consciousness experiencing all life, how can you judge? The person who triggers you is not other. They are you wearing a different face. The quality you despise in them is the quality you've rejected in yourself. The suffering they cause is the suffering of unconsciousness, the same unconsciousness you've experienced, the same unconsciousness all humans experience until they wake up. This doesn't excuse harm. This doesn't eliminate discernment. This doesn't mean you allow violation, but it means you respond from awareness rather than reactivity, from presence rather than pattern, from consciousness rather than conditioning. And there's freedom in this. Not the freedom of getting what you want. Not the freedom of controlling circumstances. Not the freedom of transcending the human condition. But the freedom of no longer being at war with what is. The freedom of letting life be as it is. Letting yourself be as you are. Letting others be as they are. Not as resignation. Not as passivity. But as acceptance of reality. As surrender to what is, which paradoxically creates the space for genuine transformation. Because you cannot change what you cannot accept. You cannot transform what you're fighting against. You cannot integrate what you're rejecting. The very act of resistance creates the thing you're resisting. The very act of fighting creates the enemy. The very act of defending creates the threat. But when you stop fighting, when you simply allow what is to be as it is, the energy that was bound up in resistance becomes available for something else. For creativity. For love. For authentic action. For response rather than reaction. This is not the end. This is not arrival. This is not permanent enlightenment. Because the ego will reassert itself. The persona will reconstruct. The shadow will press for attention again. This is not a problem. This is the rhythm of consciousness. Expansion and contraction. Awakening and forgetting. Presence and identification. But something has shifted. You've tasted what you actually are beneath the constructed self. You've recognized the awareness that witnesses all experience. You've touched the spaciousness that contains all form. And once you've tasted this, once you've recognized this, you can never fully forget it. It becomes a reference point, a touchstone, a place you can return to when you get lost in identification, when you get caught in the drama of the separate self, when you forget that you are the sky and mistake yourself for the clouds. And the body breathes. The heart beats. Sensations arise and pass. Thoughts come and go. Emotions move through like weather. The entire human experience continues. But you, the awareness that you are, you remain. Unchanged. Untouched. Eternal. Present. You are here. You have always been here. You will always be here. Not as the person with your name and your history and your personality, but as the consciousness that experiences personhood. As the awareness that witnesses life. As the presence that is prior to all experience, and yet contains all experience. This is what you are. This is what you have always been. This is what you can never not be. Rest here. Not as achievement. Not as attainment. not as something you've done, but as recognition of what has always been true, as remembering what you forgot, as coming home to what you never left. The separate self dissolves, not into nothing, but into everything, into the vast, spacious, infinite awareness that you are, that we all are, that is the ground of all being. And from this ground, from this presence, from this awareness, life continues. But differently, not as problem to solve, not as burden to carry, not as performance to maintain, but as experience to witness, as dance to participate in, as mystery to live. You are the sky, not the clouds, the ocean, not the waves, the silence, not the sound, the awareness, not the content. You are here. You are home. You have always been home. Now breathe. Feel the body. Return to form. Because the transcendent and the immanent are not separate. The absolute and the relative are not opposed. You are both the infinite awareness and the finite human. Both the eternal presence and the temporary person. Both nothing and everything. And this paradox, this beautiful, impossible, true paradox, this is what it means to be awake. The body returns to itself. Weight, gravity, the particular shape of this form, the specific history of this nervous system, the unique constellation of wounds and gifts that make up this individual expression of consciousness. You are not transcending the human experience. You are finally inhabiting it fully. This is the part most spiritual teachings miss. They speak of awakening as if it's an escape from the body, from emotion, from the messy reality of being human. They promise transcendence, as if the goal is to rise above the human condition and live in some perpetual state of blissful detachment. But that's not integration. That's dissociation dressed in spiritual language. True awakening doesn't take you out of your humanity. It brings you deeper into it. It allows you to be fully human, with all the rage and grief and desire and fear and joy that entails, while simultaneously recognizing the awareness that witnesses all of it. You are both the wave and the ocean, both the character and the consciousness, both the person with your name and history and the infinite presence that animates all life. Not one or the other. Both. Always both. So what does this mean for how you live? For how you move through the world? For how you relate to the shadow you've just encountered, the ego you've just witnessed dissolving, the awareness you've just recognized? It means you stop pretending. You stop performing the spiritual persona that has it all figured out. You stop bypassing your humanity in pursuit of some imagined enlightenment. You stop using awareness as a way to avoid feeling, presence as a way to escape pain, consciousness as a way to transcend the body. Instead, you bring awareness to your humanity. You bring presence to your pain. You bring consciousness to your body. You integrate rather than transcend. You include rather than exclude. You embrace rather than escape. The rage you encountered in the shadow, you don't act it out unconsciously, but you don't suppress it either. You feel it fully. You let it move through the body. You recognize it as energy, as information, as the organism's response to boundary violation. And from that recognition, you can choose how to respond. You can set boundaries without violence. You can say no without guilt. You can protect what matters without becoming what you're protecting against. The shame you met in the darkness? You don't believe its story, but you don't deny its presence either. You let it be felt. You bring compassionate awareness to the part of you that feels fundamentally flawed. You recognize shame as the internalized voice of those who needed you to be different than you are. And from that recognition, you can begin to separate what's true from what's inherited. You can distinguish between genuine remorse for harm caused and toxic shame about your very existence. The desire you've been suppressing? You don't indulge every impulse, but you don't starve yourself either. You let yourself want what you want. You acknowledge the hunger, the longing, the appetite for life. You recognize desire as life force, as creative energy, as the organism's movement toward what nourishes it. And from that recognition, you can pursue what genuinely serves you rather than what you think you should want. The grief you've been avoiding? You don't drown in it, but you don't dam it up either. You let it flow. You let yourself feel the full weight of what you've lost. The years spent living at a distance from yourself, the relationships you've kept shallow, the paths you didn't take because they weren't safe enough. You recognize grief as love with nowhere to go. And from that recognition, you can let it move through you, transforming from pain into depth, from loss into capacity for genuine connection. This is integration, not transcendence, not elimination, not rising above, but bringing home, owning, including, embracing the full spectrum of what it means to be human, while simultaneously recognizing the awareness that witnesses all of it. And from this integration, something new becomes possible. Not a new identity, not a better persona, not an enlightened self that replaces the old self, but a way of being that is fluid rather than fixed, present rather than defended, responsive rather than reactive, whole rather than fragmented. You stop living from the small, defended ego and start living from the vast, open awareness. But you don't abandon the ego. You recognize it as a useful tool, a necessary interface, a way of navigating the relative world. You just stop mistaking it for what you are. You stop fighting the shadow and start integrating it. But you don't become your shadow. You recognize it as containing both darkness and power, both pathology and potential. You learn to wield these forces consciously rather than being unconsciously wielded by them. You stop projecting onto others and start owning what's yours. But you don't lose discernment. You recognize that seeing your own shadow in others doesn't mean they're not actually causing harm. It just means you respond from awareness rather than reactivity, from presence rather than pattern. And relationships transform, because when you're no longer defending a false self, when you're no longer maintaining a persona, when you're no longer projecting your shadow onto others, genuine intimacy becomes possible. You can be seen, not the curated version, not the acceptable self, but the actual you, with all your contradictions and complexities, with all your light and shadow, with all your humanity, and being seen, truly seen, without having to perform or defend or manage the other person's perception. This is what your soul has been hungry for all along. You can see others, not through the lens of your projections, not through the filter of your needs, but as they actually are, as consciousness wearing a different face, as awareness having a different experience, as the same infinite presence expressing itself through a different form. And seeing others this way, without trying to change them or fix them or make them meet your needs, this is what love actually is. And your work in the world transforms. Because when you're no longer driven by the ego's need for validation, when you're no longer compensating for shame, when you're no longer proving your worth, you can finally do the work you're actually here to do. Not the work that looks impressive, not the work that makes you acceptable, not the work that earns approval, but the work that emerges from your authentic nature. The work that only you can do because it requires your specific constellation of gifts and wounds. The work that serves something larger than your personal agenda. This doesn't mean you suddenly know your purpose. It doesn't mean you have a clear mission statement. It means you stop forcing. You stop striving. You stop trying to make your life mean something, and instead let meaning emerge from living authentically, from being present, from responding to what's actually here rather than what you think should be here. But let's be clear, this is not the end of suffering. This is not permanent peace. This is not arrival at some final destination where everything is resolved and you live happily ever after in enlightened bliss. You will still feel pain. You will still experience loss. You will still face challenges. You will still get triggered. You will still forget and identify with the small self. You will still project your shadow. You will still defend your ego. You will still be human. The difference is that you'll recognize it happening. You'll catch yourself mid-pattern. You'll notice when you're defending rather than being present. You'll see when you're projecting rather than owning. You'll feel when you're contracting rather than opening. And from that recognition, you'll have choice. Not always, not perfectly, but more often, more quickly, with more awareness. And each time you catch yourself, each time you recognize the pattern, each time you choose presence over defense, you're integrating. You're becoming more whole. You're living more from awareness and less from conditioning. You're embodying the awakening rather than just understanding it intellectually. This is the work, not a one-time event, not a permanent attainment, but an ongoing practice, a continuous return, a perpetual remembering of what you are beneath the constructed self, what you contain beneath the persona, what you're capable of when you stop fighting your own wholeness. Some days you'll remember easily. You'll move through the world from presence, from awareness, from the recognition of your true nature. You'll respond rather than react. You'll include rather than exclude. You'll integrate rather than fragment. Other days you'll forget completely. You'll get lost in identification with the small self. You'll defend your ego. You'll project your shadow. You'll contract into fear and separation. And that's okay. That's not failure. That's the rhythm of consciousness. Expansion and contraction. Remembering and forgetting. Awakening and falling back asleep. The practice is simply to notice. To recognize when you've forgotten. to return to presence, to come back to awareness, to remember what you are, again and again and again, not as punishment, not as discipline, but as homecoming, as return to your true nature, as recognition of what has always been true. And over time, not in linear progression, but in spirals and cycles, the forgetting becomes less complete. The identification becomes less solid. The contraction becomes less prolonged. Not because you're getting better at being spiritual, but because you're becoming more familiar with your actual nature, more at home in awareness, more comfortable with the full spectrum of your humanity. You stop needing to be perfect. You stop trying to be enlightened. You stop performing awakening. You just are, present, aware, human, whole, containing multitudes, holding paradox, being both the infinite and the finite, both the eternal and the temporary, both nothing and everything. And this messy, beautiful, impossible, true paradox, this is what it means to be awake in human form. So where do you go from here? What do you do with this recognition? How do you live this integration? You don't need to do anything. You don't need to change anything. You don't need to become anything. You just need to remember, to return, to recognize, again and again, in each moment, in each breath, in each choice. When you notice yourself defending, soften. When you catch yourself projecting, own it. When you feel yourself contracting, breathe. When you recognize you've forgotten, remember. Not as effort, not as striving, but as simple return to what's always here. To presence, to awareness, to the consciousness that you are. And if you want support in this work, if you want to continue exploring these territories, if you want to go deeper into shadow integration and ego dissolution and authentic awakening, subscribe to this channel. Join this community. Engage with this work. Not as passive consumption, but as active participation in your own transformation. Because this work is not done alone. It requires mirrors. It requires witnesses. It requires others who are willing to see you fully and be seen fully. It requires community of people who are committed to waking up, not as spiritual achievement, but as return to their true nature. And finally, know this, you are not broken. You never were. The persona you constructed saved you. The shadow you created protected you. The ego you developed allowed you to survive. There is nothing wrong with you. There never was. You are consciousness itself, temporarily forgetting what it is, playing the game of separation, exploring the experience of being an individual self. And now you're beginning to remember. Not as concept, not as belief, but as direct recognition, as lived experience, as embodied truth. You are the awareness that witnesses all experience. You are the presence that is prior to all form. You are the consciousness that animates all life. You are both the wave and the ocean, both the drop and the water, both the individual and the infinite. You are here. You are home. You have always been home. And the work, the beautiful, endless, sacred work, is simply to remember this, to return to this, to live from this, again and again and again. Welcome home.